All right. What's going on, everyone? I've got Ben Whaley here. I'm sure you've heard my glowing review of the Unix and Linux System Administration Handbook. The fifth edition just came out, and I raved about it in a good way. Ben has kindly offered to be on tutoriaLinux and let me ask him some questions. What's going on, man? Thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a pleasure.
Cool. So we'll talk about the book in a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of get to know you a bit and give people a chance to kind of imagine, what an author of one of these like super authoritative books actually does in IT. What do you do?
Well, the world, as I'm sure we'll touch on more throughout the interview, is moving more and more towards cloud, right? So for a few years now, really since Amazon has sort of emerged as the dominant platform, around 2008, I've been pretty AWS focused. So most of my Linux administration is happening in the cloud. And also I made the transition into sort of managed infrastructure using automation tools, Puppet Chef, et cetera, around the same time, kind of as those tools were starting to emerge. So I transitioned from old system administration days to cloud administration days, and now kind of into the what's happening with servers at all, right? Are we going to the serverless world? What does that mean for system administrators? So now this is what I'm doing is programmable infrastructure, and we're applying it to a startup problem. So a lot of cloud stuff, a lot of Linux and open source stuff and security stuff, but always kind of keeping that background in mind. Like there's no doubt that those early system administration lessons you learn and the networking that you learn, it applies broadly. And so having that foundation has been really pretty good.
Yeah, that mirrors even the timeline exactly what I've seen, what's happened in my career, and kind of that shift that I've seen. It's interesting. We'll get into this a little bit more later, but a lot of people ask me this one question over and over, which is, it's funny. I literally got a notification an hour ago of someone on one of my courses on Udemy saying, "What's with all this serverless and Docker stuff? Are we basically out of a job as system and network administrators?" And my answer is always like a resounding no. Like all of those skills are still absolutely relevant. It's just like there's some new tooling and there's some new ways to think about it. But if you ask me, it's like, do I want to go back to before the word serverless existed? Well, yeah, I mean, a part of me does, but like the concept is, it's so much more exciting to be, I don't know if you can just say a system administrator anymore, but like on the ops side of things now than it was, I don't know, 10 years ago.
It's different for sure. I think system administrators, traditional ones, working in a traditional setting with a data center and physical servers they're managing and maybe optical media even, but like there's an evolution that's got to happen. But at the same time, it is still an exciting time to work on kind of ops problems. It's just that the problems are shifting and the responsibilities are shifting. And it's a discipline where you've always got to be learning the technologies that are coming. So if something like Docker, for example, is a technology that frightens you and you've never used it before and you're kind of afraid to learn it, you've got to be willing to dive into it. And Docker is just one example, but it's sort of the whole discipline is always shifting, and it always has been. This is not a new thing. It kind of goes in these cycles, and we're in this really crazy shift right now for ops that it can be kind of scary. So I'm looking at what does that mean? Like where are we headed next? Operationally, it can be a lot about monitoring and keeping the platform alive and keeping the platform secure, whatever you're running, kind of keeping it up and running. Some of the traditional duties you may have had, like mail server administration, for example, this is changing quickly. A lot of people are now running their own mail servers, and with good reason. It's hard to do.
It is hard to do.
And it's hard to keep secure for sure. And dealing with the spam problem is really difficult. And so why wouldn't most businesses trust an outside authority to do this for them? And if the answer to that, almost always, if you can ask yourself, should I be doing this or should I outsource this? If there's somebody else that can do it better, more effectively, for potentially a lower cost, then this is maybe something you shouldn't be spending your time kind of learning.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to exactly what you mentioned. Sort of the first thing you brought up, which is like how our discipline is changing. Is it's not, it's not that we don't have jobs because we're not doing all this stuff in house anymore. It's that we now have so much more work than before to integrate all these things, to get them talking to the same database, to design, architectures that can support the availability and consistency requirements that we have. And like all of that knowledge from being just a sysadmin back in the day, when like most of the time you were just like restarting Apache or like going to the data center to swap out a drive. A lot of it, like those things were never the most exciting part of doing this work. And now programming, networking, like you said, security, that stuff is super interesting and complex and fun to do. I don't think we should be bemoaning the loss of like, God damn it, it's 3 a.m. and I have to go, change a dead drive at the data center.
Yeah, I don't miss the trips to the data center at all. I actually used to thrive on going into a data center. Like, it's such a cool feeling. There's this overwhelming noise going on and the temperature's cooler, and like it's kind of this special place for a tech person to hang out and spend some time. And I think any administrator should at least have a chance to hang out in a data center for a while. But you know what? I haven't been in one for probably 6 or 7 or 8 years since my last sort of traditional system admin job, whenever that was. And part of me doesn't miss that. Like, I don't miss slinging cables.
I agree.
I don't miss optical media.
Oh God. Yeah. No, it's definitely, everyone should do it once. Go into like the most secure building you've ever been in, 3 fingerprint scans, 2 different badges, 2 different companies doing security. Like, it's fun the first 10 times, but yeah. So you just mentioned
about that if you want into it later.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Stories the data center. So I was a defense contractor, and I worked for Digital Globe as the company. Digital Globe makes satellites that supply imagery for Google Earth, for the military, for lots of purposes, right? And they have a really secure facility, and they have like Department of Defense secured offline network. And so I worked in the situation where there's kind of an offline, like you go in there, there's no internet access. You put your internet connected laptop and your mobile device out on some shelf, and you go into this room, and it's totally separate. And they have the maintenance person, like the facilities manager, installed speakers in the data center, so that anybody that needed to come into the data center who wasn't cleared could you could flip on this switch, the music and the speakers would turn on, and anybody that was in there would be like, oh, there's somebody not cleared in here. I can like lock up my workstation and make sure it's secured. So this is like pretty paranoid, right?
Wow.
And the fatal flaw in the system was that she connected an iPod to stereo and put 5 songs on it. And the songs were like YMCA and Brown Eyed Girl and like 2 or 3 more songs that you've heard a million times already. And when there's uncleared people in the data center all the time, and you're listening to this loop on repeat of like YMCA a million times a day, it just makes you crazy. And I swear I quit the job 50% because of that alone. So for that reason, I don't miss data centers, but that was a special case.
I love it. Yeah, I made the terrible mistake once of picking an on-call notification song once, because I was like, hey, I rooted my phone, I can do whatever I want on it. And so instead of a ringtone, I chose a song that I really liked. And that was the job where I got paid more than anything, because management was terrible and, alert fatigue, etc. And I'd get woken up 3 times a night when I was on call with this song, and by the end I just hated it so much. I just couldn't hear it anymore. It's just
I know the
brutal
feeling. You get sick of your alarm sound, whatever it is. You're like, I do not want to be woken up right now.
Yep. Yeah. So I think the moral here is let us not pine for those days. It's like there's other stuff to get alerted for now, and it's like you should be automating that stuff half the time.
Look forward. Enjoy your sleep.
Yep. You just mentioned your first couple IT gigs. How did you actually get into tech in general? Like, where did it start for you?
Yeah.
Not just career-wise, but interest-wise.
Yeah, way back, actually. So it's a pretty random occurrence because I grew up in rural Wyoming, and there just happened to be in the town that we lived a Commodore 64 club in the 80s, in like the mid 80s. And my dad was like kind of vague. He was a fish biologist for the Wyoming Game and Fish, but He was interested in computers, and he was in this Commodore 64 club, and he subscribed to the Bytes magazine, I think it was, and it came with a floppy disk with like some programs on it. And so
Awesome.
I got into these games on the floppy disk, and I hung around the Commodore 64 club, and I kind of got introduced to programming in BASIC. And I was around, 7, 8 years old, 6, 7, 8 years old, pretty young. And then it sort of just spiraled from there because I learned how to program. At that age, I could write some BASIC, and it was all just right there in the magazine. You just had to retype it in. So I got kind of good at computers, and then by the time I was 14 or so, I met this guy who ran a little computer shop, like a little office network repair. These were common in the 90s, where a little small business needed 4 or 5 computers, and they needed a little network and a router to hook it all up. So I figured out the basics of networking, and I worked with this dude to install Windows networks and set up printers, that kind of thing. Traditional route, I think, that people take to become system administrators. I knew from that time I should go into computer science. I was also into music. So I was kind of deciding between music and computers, and I decided on the practical route rather than the super fun route. And I went into computers, and I went to computer science at Boulder. And so this is actually kind of where I got hooked into the book. So I'm not sure if that's something you want to get into now, but that was
Absolutely.
that was this networking job that I had for 6 or 7 years, doing kind of small office networks and PC repair stuff. I got into Linux because like in the late 90s, because I needed to run a little office network, and I didn't have the gear that I wanted, and I learned about Linux from somebody. And so at first it was really this, I can remember how intimidating and how big of a world it seemed to get into Unix. And in hindsight, that feels like such a long time ago, and it was like 18 years ago or 19 years ago now. Now it feels so familiar, but at the time I remember it was just engrossing. Like, I bought a book on it, I was absorbed with it, I was reading fiction and nonfiction stuff about Unix. I really got into the kind of gray hat scene in the 90s,
Sounds
with
kind of for me
IRC
too.
and Juarez and stuff. I was into the big IRC network splits, and like I was really big on the IRC scene. Before that, the BBS scene. But as soon as I kind of discovered the communications world around networking and how you could connect to the whole world, that was it. Like, from there, for me, the future was written.
Yeah, it's funny, like that feeling you described. That's what I had when I discovered like Usenet is a thing, and like IRC. It was just, it like opened up the world suddenly, and I was like, whoa, there's millions of people like me that are into this stuff and interested by this stuff.
It was really magical, right? And I guess I worry now that if you're kind of a digital native or whatever they call this generation that's happening now, this is not an experience that you're ever going to have, I don't think, in the same way, because you have these walled
Yeah.
gardens, the Facebooks and Google, and like, it's not the same as everything is like the Wild West, right? It kind of felt like this exploratory new dimension or something.
Yep. Yeah. It's a special feeling. That's one of the things that I hope that I can like bring to people that watch the channel, that watch the tutorials, and listen to interviews, the podcast, etc. Is just like that feeling of, before it was just like, how do I get my Red Hat cert? How do we get my Linux Foundation cert? It's like, that is not the point at all. Like, fine, maybe you do that, maybe you don't. But like the magic of, going from not really being connected with other people that are into whatever you're into, to being connected with those people and like having to learn some computing basics to do it. Just like the joy of that, it's like, I can't imagine. I don't think I would be where I am now. I doubt you would be where you are if it had been like this dry, like, oh, I just got to get this high paying job, so I'm going to study for this cert to like memorize a bunch of shit about Linux. It's just, it never would have happened for me that way. So it's like kindling that feeling of excitement and exploration is like one of the most important things I think you can do for people that are just starting. And I think it's actually one of the reasons I love the book so much, is it has that. Like I mentioned, I think in the review, by the way, if you guys haven't seen the review, I will link it here somewhere. Check it out. I think the book that Ben worked on is the best book out there for like working sysadmin, ops, DevOps, whatever you want to call it, professionals. And one of the reasons it's so great is that it's not just like a tome that sits on your desk. It's something that you actually want to read, and that gives you that feeling of like, wow, this stuff is really cool. And it's actually not that hard. Like I could just go try this right now. Just enough theory to get people started. That's what it has. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for all the kind words on that. A couple reactions. One is that this passion that we're talking about, this sort of natural inclination to learn more about the field, I think it's a good litmus test for whether this is something you want to do with your time and with your career and with your life. If you're really passionate and interested in it, that is a good sign. It's what you should be doing. On the other hand, if it's something that you do feel like you have to sort of make yourself do, and you force yourself to read a chapter of the book or to practice a programming course or whatever it is, you have to make it because this is what you want to do. It's not a good sign that you're going to be happy in that profession. And then there are plenty of people in the profession, trust me, that are unhappy with their choice. And just a piece of advice: use it as your guiding light or not.
Yeah, I like that. I agree. It's funny because I always think of this as an industry where it's like, it's basically like I didn't have to like study for this at all. But then I think back and I'm like, I have spent thousands upon thousands of hours reading about this stuff for fun. Like that's why I'm good at what I do. It just didn't seem like work to me. But it's like, it is not study for a cert and you're set. It's like if you live and breathe this stuff and you truly are interested, like you just said, then it will come naturally and it won't feel like you're putting in that much time. But you will be putting in that much time. So think twice before jumping in.
Yeah. 20 years on, or how long have I been doing it professionally since graduation? Something like 12, 13 years on. I still get up and I'm like excited to do some tasks, some open source, some like programming tasks. Usually, there's business stuff that is not as interesting for me at least. But when it comes to the technical stuff, I'm still just as interested in it. And that's really refreshing when you talk to so many people in so many fields that are like bored out of their mind and can't wait for the weekend. This is not how I have to live, and I'm really appreciative of that.
Little shift here. Early on in your career, or I guess across your career so far, what are some of the like luckiest calls you made, or like the best decisions you made that end up having kind of an outsized impact? Now I know a lot of these are like something lucky happens, or like you run into someone and it's like, wow, it's good that I stayed out to have some beers with these people because this is going to be my next job. But do you have any stories like that, or can you remember small things that became big?
I think a good example of that is actually kind of how I got introduced to the whole system administration handbook crowd in the first place, because the book is older. It's from 1989, before I was able to get involved, but it was born in the University of Colorado from Evie Nemeth. And Evie was a famous, whichever word you want to use, professor there, always kind of went against the grain, the real hacker mentality kind of a woman. And when I was looking at schools to go to in high school, I was trying to pick which college to go to, and I found the Wozniak Scholarship, Steve Wozniak Scholarship at University of Colorado. And I was looking into how to get this scholarship, and I emailed and inquired about it, and I kind of got batted around. Like nobody really knew anything about this scholarship or who was responsible for it or whether it even existed. It seemed like some kind of stale page that was left over on the website. So eventually I ended up in Evie's inbox, and I arranged a time to drive from Wyoming down to University of Colorado at Boulder and to meet with Evie to kind of like get a tour. The Wozniak was a lab at the university in the computer science department, and the position was like maintaining the computer lab basically and making sure all the students were all set up for it. So I show up at the university and I'm like waiting there for 45 minutes or something. And then Evie shows up, and I didn't know what to expect, right? I didn't know whether it was a man or a woman from the name alone. But I show up and there's this little woman who's in her late 60s or something with white hair and these moon boots from the 70s, like up above, like practically to her knees, disheveled. It's all snowy outside. And she's just like a whirlwind. And she shows me and she's asking me questions about Unix. And I'm like, oh, I just got the bat book and I'm editing sendmail.cf by hand. And she's like, well, you're an idiot. You should be editing the MC file. And I'm like, I did not know at the time that I'm talking to this this seasoned veteran of Unix who's been involved since the earliest days. So I got a tour of the lab and kind of, anyway, that was my introduction to Evi. And a year or something later, I made the choice to go to the school. The scholarship turned out not to even exist. That was kind of funny. But I ended up going to the school anyway, and by a fortuitous turn of events, kind of got plugged into the handbook. But that was one of those times where it was like the kind of happenstance that you wouldn't have expected that led to later good stuff.
That is magical. Wow. Yeah, I love hearing patching together from like people's stories and blogs and like the forward to the book, like stories about Evie, and like just imagining what that character must have been like. It's like amazing.
Yeah,
just a real character.
Wild. She's famous for this because she kind of collected undergrads as people that could really accomplish more than they were given credit for. So she would haul them around to conferences or events or like hackathons and kind of make them run the show, right? Make them in charge of scheduling and setting up the networks if it needed a network and kind of like lining everything up. They would be her little minions. And so I kind of got the tail end of that, but some of the other authors on the book, they were right in the meat of her time kind of managing undergrads. So she had a whole set of followers. And when we went to her memorial, a bunch of them showed up, like tons of these people from the 80s and 90s of her life showed up just to sort of communicate how important that kind of time in their life was. And I was kind of sad that I got the tail end of it, but at least I got, some of that attention. That was fun.
It's a rare honor. You're one of the, what did you guys call it? Evie's kids?
Evie's kids, that's what Trent calls it.
That's an honor. Let's talk about some specific tech stuff, just to keep the internet kids interested.
Yeah, I don't think they're here for the history lesson.
It's like, that's what I came for, but I know. It's like, what's your favorite technology right now, either that you're using or that you're excited about learning? What gives you that feeling now that we were talking about?
Oh, dang. I mean, that's really hard to narrow down. I think there's a lot of sad things.
And I was just going to say, or anything that gives you the opposite. That's actually the part of the question I was like, don't be so negative, Dave, and I crossed it out. But
let's get both sides of it. I mean, here's the one thing that to me is really sad, and maybe this won't resonate with anyone but like a Linux or networking person, but it's like the death of protocols. Today, practically everything is moving to HTTP, and all these other protocols that were so fun to learn and like understand all the bowels of are kind of going away. That really kind of brings me down. There's still plenty out there to celebrate, but some of these stalwarts, the FTPs, the SMTPs of the world, they're dying a slow and well-deserved death.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you bring that up. Actually, I have a friend that complains about that occasionally. He's very involved in like writing backend services, and he's like, I guess everything's just HTTP and JSON now. It's like they can't even pick a good serialization format. It's like,
I know, it's tragic. So that's kind of sad. But on the other side, there's plenty to celebrate. Obviously, there's so much development going on in so many areas. It's the hardest thing is like picking something to specialize in, because you can't possibly. Yeah. It seems like in the 90s you could kind of understand the internet broadly, the whole thing, and now the niches are getting deeper and deeper, and there's no way I can be like a security expert and a database expert and a networking expert all at the same time. So the generalist days are on the decline. But that said, in terms of like specific techs that I like working on, the serverless stuff I think is pretty fascinating to me. Like, I'm sure we'll get into that a little more. But the fact that you can kind of just write these functions and they execute in response to events and everything gets connected together through events, this is clearly the future. This is where
I agree. Yeah, it's I call it the like node.js for infrastructure, like idea, or for backends of just like event-based, programming essentially.
That's really what it is. Yeah. And it's not perfectly suited to every use case. But maybe it will be someday, right? There are limitations of the technology today. For example, the biggest limitation I can think of is the execution time limit. On AWS, it's 5 minutes for Lambda functions.
Mhm.
I'm not sure. Maybe the other platforms have different limits.
Google is always keeps one around, I think, warm. So you never have that first hit
Not the
penalty.
first start. But how long can it execute at a time, right? Like, could you run it as a daemon, basically? Or stuff that needs to process a lot of data, for a long time? That's not going to work in a function.
Yeah.
The data needs to be local.
But I think that's actually a really healthy outlook. Like I'm always worried when people are like all in on one concept, and it's like I've never met a concept that really applied to everything perfectly. So like the interesting thing about it is it clearly solves this like subclass of problems that we've had neatly. And like we could just like take those out of Chef and out of the other horrible things that we've done and just like put them into this other model of thinking about it. And that's, you know, really useful. I think treating it like that is it's definitely something that I recommend getting into.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of picking a technology and deciding if it fits or not trying to fit a glove where it shouldn't be.
I'm still trying to get over the pain I feel when everyone says serverless. Like I know it's fine, but I'm just
Yeah.
like every time I'm just like
I know. I
if
have
you
a
design
blog.
it without thinking about the server, you're gonna run into issues.
I have a blog article about this. Like, you're not going to be good at serverless if you don't understand what is actually running on. You still have to understand the host a little bit, or the operating system environment in which you're in. So if there is a server and you can't just count on it blindly working all the time. So there was the first serverless conference. There was like some guy that demonstrated on stage a server propped up between two stools, and he was like smashing it with a bat. And I was like, that's a little over the top.
That is, yeah,
But
the sales event.
the name's here to stay, so we all just kind of have to get used to it, I think.
I hear you. I actually have this perched up on the first edition of the Unix System Administration Handbook. I
So
got it out just for this interview.
this is an interesting fact, because I saw you holding it in your interview. I think you pulled it out, and I was like, you know what? I don't even have that copy.
If I can find another one, I will send it to you.
Oh, that's awesome.
So my uncle gave me this one. He was a Cisco and then Lucent and then Cisco guy. So big on the early security and networking, that kind of stuff. And when I came to him at age 13 or 14 and was like, I'm going to be a hacker, he was like, oh yeah, here's my stack of Cisco TCP/IP manuals. Read them and I'll quiz you on them before I give you links to interesting things, to interesting communities to hang out in. And I, of course, failed. I remember the very first time he asked me anything about it was, is TCP a secure protocol? And I was like, yes, the messages always get there. And he's like, no, that's the difference. It's like, it's reliable, not secure. It's like,
Nice.
stands out in my memory. It's just like, that's when I knew that hacking was a little bit harder than I thought it was.
Hey, that's a good lesson to learn at a young age.
I never did make it all the way through those manuals. Okay, let's talk about a couple. Well, actually, no, we got to do the flip side. What's your least favorite technology or solution or hype machine right now?
Oh, well, you already said Node.js. I've got beef with Node.js for sure. This NPM repository is what kills me.
Dude, you find them everywhere now in places you don't expect NPM repositories. I pull a package down on FreeBSD and it's like NPM something. I'm like, why is this part of the build?
I know, if you look at the package repo for NPM related stuff, there's like hundreds and hundreds of packages. And if you decompose your average node package and look at what it depends on, and it's depending, here's a perfect example of this. This is typical. Maybe some of your viewers like remember this. There was a dependency on is positive integer. This is a function that somebody wrote up into a package and published it. And all of these downstream packages dependent on it. The guy changes the function and causes a bug, and hundreds of downstream packages fail because they can't determine if an integer is positive or not. And to me, it's like, this is a short function. This is 4 lines of code or something. I can't understand why you need to outsource this functionality. This is representative of the Node ecosystem in my mind. Also, yeah. I'm not a JavaScript or a Node person, and so somebody who is going to be like, well, that you should never have done that, and that person's an idiot. Like, there's plenty of people who are good Node programmers, and so I don't want to bring them down. But this is something that I can't connect with very well.
Yeah, I've got a friend that is very involved in Node, and it's hilarious. It's like you feed him a beer and he just begins raging immediately of like, oh, so there's this database package that everyone uses in every tutorial, and it's a one-line thing that actually prevents you from like doing your queries in advance and making them fast and scalable and secure, and it actually just creates a bunch of injection vulnerabilities. Congratulations.
Terrible.
I love it. I should get him on here and just like feed him a beer and just start system D, node.js. Tell me something.
People that can rant indefinitely are always entertaining.
Yeah, that's great. If you had 30 seconds to explain DevOps to someone that was just getting started, how would you describe it? What's your view on it?
Oh, I've got a lot of opinions about this. There's the official book opinion. The book opinion is that DevOps, and this is like the mainstream, if you're to really read about DevOps and learn about it, it's a philosophy around, how to manage uptime, pretty much, how to manage operations and do it in a way that is compatible with the business. In my mind, it's the evolution of system administration, right? It's system administration plus some automation, plus the recognition that visibility and telemetry is a big part of operations. And so sort of formalizing that, this is kind of where the monitoring love movement was born, I think. And log collection started to get some momentum, because back in the 2000s, it was all about sec.pl, is a big Perl script that had fancy regex parsing, and you could parse out what you wanted in an alert based on that. But now it's all formalized with nice products like Splunk and Sumo Logic and CloudWatch logs, or whatever you like to use, or Graylog and Elk Stack. There's tons of good tooling around this, but this didn't emerge until DevOps was around. And on top of all that, there is this element of culture of like people kind of communicating better, looking at it as a pipeline, as a delivery system, as a factory of software, pushing it out in a really reliable way. So it's kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of lessons from system administration, but formalized and kind of put in order and then talked about in nice settings like at DevOps days and at other conferences that have really, I think, done a lot to open the communication around that. Probably this is more than 30 seconds.
Yeah, the time limit was just to add stress and tension to the moment.
Cool. It felt I was
useful.
Really feeling the pressure.
No one said this was going to be easy, man. I'm sorry.
I know. I'm going to be exhausted by the time we're done. I'm sure.
What are your thoughts on Docker specifically, containerization in general?
Yeah. Docker.
What do you think?
Well, I did the containers chapter in the new version of the book, which is pretty Docker centric. And I was in San Francisco, living in San Francisco around the time that Docker sort of emerged from .cloud to the open source product. And I had a chance to implement it really early on before any of the orchestration frameworks were around. I think the first version I had running in production, like an insane person, was version 0.5. I embraced it. I was really excited about it, and I remain excited about it. And of course, it's really different now than it was even this was like 2012, 2013, I think. And at this point, it's pretty mainstream. It's Kubernetes is sort of taking the world by fire. Everybody's moving onto Kubernetes, or they're choosing one of the other orchestration platforms. Pick your poison there. I kind of think it's going to take this route where if you're running your workload on the cloud, you're not really going to have to run a cluster of Kubernetes servers. And you're probably not really in the end going to need to mess with Docker yourself, because there's going to be a platform that just sort of handles it, right? It's going to be managed Docker service. So you build your container image, you push it to a repository, and you tell this cluster to run it, and it's going to schedule it and handle it for you. And so we very quickly went from a world where there was no containers, jails. We could talk about the nuances of that. And I would love to say for the record about jails in the handbook. I've had some people asking me why aren't jails covered and why aren't you mentioning jails more? And it's like, have you ever used a jail really? Are you going to use a jail today? Because the handbook is already 1,300 pages.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Every single thing. Anyway.
I only criticize it because I actually use jails more or less every day.
Really?
Less than every day just because they sort of work.
Yeah.
Now that I've set everything up. But no, I mean, you can't, like you said, you can't fit everything in there, and you can't please everybody. Like, you have to hit the most important notes.
It's hard. It's a big field. There's tons of tools out there. What do you pick, right?
Yep.
We tried to be really choosy and pick the most mainstream packages and the ones that we thought had the biggest future.
Yep.
So this means, you're going to you'll disappoint some people. We had to cut some corners in the book just because, like, cloud is a good example. In the book, there's a chapter on cloud that is pretty light, pretty introductory. It has pointers to a bunch of other material in the book that has some more depth about the networking, about VPSs, that sort of thing. But the book is not a cloud book, right? In the end, it's a Unix and Linux book, and it's impossible to talk about that topic today without also talking about cloud, because it has reached its height or something, its peak in cloud. Everything cloud is pretty much Unix and Linux, really not as much Windows. So we're really torn on what direction to go with that chapter. Do we go into a really deep cloud topic? Not really. It's a Unix and Linux book. So maybe someday there could be a cloud system administration handbook, and that could probably be pretty interesting. But in the end, we didn't feel like it had a place, a permanent kind of home in this book.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that was exactly what you said was sort of my opinion on it. I was like, oh man, it's just like a getting started guide for all the major clouds right now. But then I was like, well, what else are you going to do to keep this from turning into a 200-page section? Is like, are you going to really cover all of them? If you're going to cover anything in depth, you got to pick one, and then you're playing favorites with these like huge companies. That's a little bit dangerous. There's no good way to do that except get people started, like get them typing in the programs from Byte magazine, and like they'll figure it out from there. It's not this book's business to hold everybody's hand all the way through.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we walked away with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Docker. I've got one. I don't know why this one's in this section, but what's the worst and or funniest mistake you've ever made in production?
Oh man, there's been a few. I don't know.
That are not too painful to talk about.
Enough years have gone by. The wounds are gone. I was in the Unix administration department at Boulder when I was a student there, and it was responsible for all the faculty, staff, student backend stuff. So all the web servers that run like the scheduling system and the courses and the administrative systems, and even for the health department, I think there was like some servers and the email and everything. And we got in these new Sun Blade chassis. And so as the intern or whatever, I was responsible for unboxing, installing hard drives, racking them, setting everything up, wiring everything in the data center. I can remember that we're planning this migration from the old servers to these new Blade chassis. And as I was going through the wiring process and we were going to cut something over, I unplugged the faculty staff production email server, and it was, I didn't know it for a while. It was down for like 45 minutes or something.
Oh man, that's great.
I brought down email for the whole UC Boulder campus. This is pretty stressful as an intern.
That's right. So you hear that, kids? Don't try to become a hacker. Just be a regular sysadmin. You'll take down way more systems just by accident.
There's nothing like human error to compete with that. I can remember another embarrassing situation at a hospital later when I was a consultant after graduating, but pretty young still, maybe a year or two into my career. We were doing a project to secure some stuff, and we're working in a hospital environment with an EMR system, electronic medical record system. And we need to update the LDAP password for the Windows user that authenticated to the CMR. And I planned it all out. I had everything pretty much in order. And I was working with the guy there was the administrator. I was not allowed to twiddle the bits. He had to do it. But I was telling him kind of what we needed to do. I told him the password. I was really clear. He messed it up. The whole EMR for the hospital was down for like 20, 25 minutes. And that's bad. That's like life-danger situation.
Yeah, stuff can't
They've got
happen.
emergency procedures for that, so they did it or whatever. But that was stressful.
Wow.
This is typical, right? This is what happens to sysadmins.
Yep. It's my first manager gave me the valuable lesson of don't worry, fix it now, worry about it later. The sweat makes you learn. It's true. I've never forgotten those things that I've learned during outages.
No doubt.
That emotional stress just cements them in there.
The better side though is the exciting stuff. Like, I don't know if you were going to ask about that, but there are moments in administration that really bring you back every day. And for me, it's especially in the area of security, because I did pen testing, AppSec testing, this kind of thing. When you find a vulnerability or when you find an exploit and you're able to root a box or expose something or learn something you're not supposed to know. And, as long as it's all above board, of course, like that's,
You did not do this in the hospital, for the record.
yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. But it's really a rush, right? When you are able to find something you're not, it's like, dang, that's awesome. It feels really good. It's this total moment for you. And then you just sort of peak there. And so those kind of rushes keep you coming back.
I want to talk about the book itself and how all that happened. But first, I'm going to annoy you with rapid fire questions.
Oh, really? I'm going to watch out.
5 of them. 5 whole ones. They're literally one-word answers. And it's just about like your everyday carry kind of stuff.
Okay.
What's your everyday work operating system?
Mac.
What was it before? If it was anything before?
Debian.
Which editor do you use?
Vim in Atom.
Oh, yeah.
GitHub Atom Editor with the Vim plugin.
You already answered the cloud platform question. You're mostly on AWS?
Yeah, pretty exclusive.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to learn that one. If you guys are wondering which one to learn first, learn AWS, because that's like a huge part of that market. Which programming language, scripting languages do you like and use? And how has that changed over time?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, it's changed over time. I started with Perl. Well, I started with Basic.
Yeah, Perl.
Then
Perl 6, baby.
Yeah.
It's going to be awesome.
I don't know about that. Did some Ruby when the Puppet and Chef scene exploded. I have like total mixed feelings about Ruby. It's fine. I'm not sure it has much of a future. Python, I'm a big fan of. And Golang, of course. Golang is the system administrations. That's the new thing. So
yep.
So that's where I'm at, is Python and Go. A lot of that, really.
Awesome.
And Bash is the utility, right? It's the glue.
Yeah, you got to know Bash. It's true. I never recommend it as a first language.
It's a terrible language.
Exactly. But you will use it all the time. So it's like learn to program with something easier, and then learn about Bash and weird test cases and like old test and new test and all that stuff as your second language or your third one. But yeah, I always recommend like Python, Bash, and now Golang. Like if you cover those in a span of 2 to 3 years, like you can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, those are the staples.
This is the last one. Favorite tools. This could be for anything, like CLI tools, CI/CD tools. That's continuous integration and continuous delivery.
Well, the one I already mentioned that I recommend to any administrator or any developer is Vim. It's if you spend half a day learning Vim, it will improve your administration career dramatically. It's so fast. It's portable to everything. It's on every system you'll ever encounter. It's in single user mode on any Unix. You can type VI and have a familiar editor, and it'll make you fast. So that's the tool to know. SSH is the Swiss Army knife of administration. I added 10 pages, I think, in the security chapter about SSH with basically every feature that I know about.
I love it.
Detail.
And I did not see that section. I have to admit, I will read it.
Read the security chapter. It's probably the chapter I'm the most proud of, and the SSH chapter there, section in that chapter is that's got the good stuff in it. So SSH is really useful.
Love it. Yeah, Swiss Army knife.
Outside of that, I use browsers a lot. Who doesn't use a browser every day? I use curl a lot as well.
Ooh, that's another one of those great tools. So many flags.
JQ a lot. JQ is a great tool.
Parse your JSON responses. It's beautiful.
Yeah, precisely. For CI/CD, I use Jenkins. Everybody uses Jenkins. I like Grafana. Who doesn't love Grafana? It's great dashboarding software.
Yeah.
I write some tools too. I'm about to open source something. We'll talk about that later, I guess.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. I will put all of the things that we talk about that are your interesting, fun, cool projects just in the description below. So if you're watching this, open up the description below and open a bunch of new tabs.
Don't forget about PyCharm. Great IDE for Python.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Actually, I haven't used that in several. Is that the JetBrains people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've got a new Golang IDE as well.
Oh.
Yeah, good
Interesting. I've actually recently, someone in the comments was like, you left out VS Code, Microsoft's Visual Studio open source thing. And I was like, yeah, right. That was my reaction. Then I was like, I got to download this and at least try it. And I've been using it for Go, and it's like quite good.
Is it nice?
Very, very good. It's fast. It's clean. It does what you want. It has like the, Sublime texty atomy package system and the ease of that. It's pretty awesome.
You know what? As long as I can have Vim in an editor, I don't really care what the environment is.
That's like the first plugin everyone implements. Come on. You'll never be without a Vim
I know, it's
emulator.
great. It's great. If you're using Emacs, I feel bad for you, son.
I love Emacs. You just cut me deep, man. No, so it's like I love Emacs, but I actually don't use it every day. So maybe that tells you everything you need to know. I used to use it for everything all the time for like 3 years, and I just slowly stopped using it. We're back after our small technical glitch. What would a technical video or podcast be without some kind of technical failure somewhere?
Would we be system administrators if there wasn't a problem?
No. Actually, I should just page you right now just to like really get the full feeling that we're supposed to have here. So I forget exactly where we left off, but it's not that important because we're about to talk about the book. Tell me the story of how you sort of started telling how you became involved with the book. But I'm kind of interested in all of it. Like, how did you get into it? Which sections did you work on the most? Give it all to me.
All right. Well, let's see. Like I said, I met Evie at University of Colorado. But even at that time, I didn't know really about the book or her role. I just met her for the first time. And so that was kind of crazy. But then I went to school. I got my degree in computer science, and I wrote an essay for a contest at the end of my senior year. The contest was to attend the Telluride Tech Fest, which is held or was held annually in Telluride, Colorado, beautiful mountain town. And I got to go. I won the contest. I wrote this essay. I won the contest. I won a trip to Telluride. And I got to meet all these interesting people, including Neil Armstrong and Freeman Dyson, who were both there. Like,
whoa,
serious kind of like space people. This was a space-focused tech conference. And at the time, Trent and Ned from Applied Trust were running this conference. Trent is the co-author of the book.
Trent Hein.
Yeah. And Herb Moriali, it was his partner running previous businesses. Anyway, it's kind of this old club of people that went to computer science at University of Colorado before and knew Evie really well and had run businesses in the tech industry in Boulder. And so I went there kind of with the hope that I would just have a fun weekend, but maybe I would meet some people. And I ended up meeting Trent and this kind of whole crew there. And they said they had positions for people like me and said I should apply. So some time went by and I decided to apply there when the time came. And so I got connected to Trent. And then they decided to work on the next edition of the Linux Handbook, because you may or may not know there are 5 editions of the Unix System Administration Handbook. Well, let's see, there were 3 editions of just Unix, a couple editions of Unix and Linux, but there were 2 variants, kind of branches that were just Linux only when they weren't sure what direction to go. So as they're working on the 2nd edition of that, that's when I started working with Trent. I got assigned the noob task of setting up the book lab, which was like all the variant flavors of Linux that they were going to cover. I was responsible for sort of managing this little lab environment for them, setting it up. And they needed some help with some of the chapters. As a 32 chapter book, 1,400 pages. It's a lot of work to do. So I ended up writing 1 chapter. They liked that. I did 3 more chapters, and I was a contributor on that edition. And so later, as 4, 5, 6 years later, as they decided to do the combined Unix and Linux System Administration Handbook, 4th edition, the big one.
For the 4th one, yeah, right.
I was brought on as a full co-author, and I wrote a lot of that. I probably wrote close to a third of that book. And that was a big rewrite. And then I did another third for this edition. So I hold a chunk of the writing there, but the real mastermind, of course, in my opinion, is Garth, who is just really a brilliant guy and a good writer and a great editor, and sort of takes all the different authors and contributors that work on an edition and give it the same tone and feel throughout.
That is a huge thing that I notice. I was just going to say that because, clearly it's like this work is being largely divided into chunks and people are working on the topics that they're the most interested in, the most experienced in. The tone, the fact that you guys managed to capture, I know everybody's going to get sick of hearing it, but that excitement and that feeling, and kind of have it be so consistent. It never shows up as like an anthology or something. Anyway, there's never like a big jump in tone. It's pretty good. There's nothing
Yeah,
to
I
kind of
try to
pull
have
you out of
some
flow.
mark and some humor in there, and I try to match Garth's style as closely as I can so that at least he doesn't have an overly burdensome editing task. But in the end, he's the real wordsmith, in my opinion. So I do a lot of the heavy labor in terms of like learning something I didn't know before or contributing a substantial new chapter like containers, or I did the CI/CD chapter in this book, which was also a big chunk of work, which I did with Fabrizio in Germany, one of the contributors on this edition. We kind of tag team that one. But then Garth grooms it and really makes it, polishes it, kind of makes it shine.
Cool. Are there any fun, like behind the scenes ULSA stories that you can
I could
share?
tell one that I wasn't really privy to at the time because it happened before my time on the book. I came in, as I said, kind of in the last 3 editions or so. But there was a time when Garth was not the real editor, the copy editor of the book, and they had a publisher assigned copy editor. And the copy editor didn't know anything about tech, of course, and did a find and replace throughout the book for /etc/etsy or and so on, etc. reference was replaced. So you had like /and so on /past WD.
Oh,
Wow. That
wow.
was a wreck. And at that point, they're like, you know what? We're going to have to take over editing of this because the publisher clearly can't do it themselves.
Wow. Yeah, that is exactly the kind of mistake I would expect. So which chapters did you specifically work on the most? What was that like?
Well, several new chapters. This edition was a major rewrite with a bunch of new content because so much has changed in the past 6-7 years in this area. So I think I mentioned a bunch of them already. Containers, CI/CD, those were brand new chapters. I revised
Security?
security, NFS, where to start. I wrote that chapter and added a bunch of content to it. Software installation and management. A couple more. Can't keep them all straight. Web hosting. I did the web chapter, which was also a total rewrite.
That is great. I appreciate that so much. Just the fact that Nginx has its own shelf space in there now.
Nginx
Makes a lot of sense.
for sure. Since the last edition, it's clearly kind of the leading web server anymore. Some people are still using Apache. I think either one is ultimately a fine choice. I included HA Proxy. It's my favorite load balancing software. And I tried to give some nice architectural overviews because the previous version it didn't get into enough of the details of HTTP, in my opinion, which is pretty much the fundamental protocol that a sysadmin needs to know today. And it was really just kind of an Apache chapter. And that made sense in the late 90s and the 2000s. And today, it's such a vast ecosystem that it's really just hard to not have a whole book about web system administration because there's layers to it. I tried to kind of convey that in the book.
I don't know if I read through all of those, but I definitely heavily scanned them and was like, it just like ticked off all the things that I were hoping would be updated and changed, from the 4th edition of like, okay, this is getting a little bit stale. You guys updated it all. So
yeah, I mean, all the others did a great job. I don't want to undersell any of them. They did, their fair share of work. Trent did a lot of work to revise some of the work that Evie had previously done. She was responsible for DNS and email, which are 2 of the biggest chapters in the book.
Yep.
He had a lot of work, like cutting back SendMail, for example, which Evie went to town on it because she's super close with the authors of SendMail, Eric Allman, and so that was a big chapter that he had to kind of bring down to size.
I think I remember someone saying that was actually better SendMail documentation than the SendMail documentation from one of those old editions.
I can't go on the record with any formal commentary about SendMail documentation, but I have news about the configuration format.
Yeah, the SendMail config file, man. It's like your like your vimrc or your .emacs file. It's like this. No one except for you will understand it by the time you're done. As long as everyone agrees on that, we're cool.
It is a language of its own, but today it seems like postfix is kind of people's mail server of choice.
Who are your technical heroes? Do you have any? You mentioned a couple of big names.
I mean, Ken Thompson, the old Bell Labs Unix wizard that wrote Unix and kind of did the C programming language. has a long time been a hero of mine. Him and Dennis Ritchie both have. Bruce Schneer, security wizard, always love to read his cryptogram blog. Lots of good information there. Linus, of course, Linus Torvalds is an inspiration to all of us. He invented two technologies that give the open source world meaning, and both of them, it's hard to know which of his inventions, Linux or Git, is more important.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, so those are no surprises, I'm sure.
It's yeah, it's definitely no Pulse Audio or System D. You know, it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
So,
you had to go there, didn't you?
I'm sorry. It's just, you know, one guy, two big technologies. I'm sorry. I take it all back.
You know, Linus uses System D. He doesn't care. He's like, it's fine.
That's cool. Yeah. No.
To him, it's all user land.
Yeah. Exactly. For him, it's like the kernel's the only important thing. You know, I completely understand. I do.
Yeah. Me too.
Sorry, I stopped you short. Obviously, Linus.
Yeah, I mean, those are the main guys. Vint Cerf is another inspiration. I used to love reading these, like, Unix history, kind of where did everything come from. I was really fascinated by that. There's a lot of good stuff on that. There's a history chapter in the book that kind of goes into a little detail about the history. And the other good book to read, I think, is called Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution. It's by Stephen Levy. That's a really interesting read about early kind of hacker culture. That's the kind of thing that really got me hooked in the industry, is how innovative some of these early kind of sysadmins were. Really fun stuff.
I love all that stuff. Again, it's just all about kind of recapturing that motivation, and that, like, before it became a really good career, you know, it's like if you just take the career word, move it off to the side, and like do the things, read the things that will just make you love it for what it is and appreciate the incredible history of this thing. You know, it's like accounting doesn't have that cool of an industry. It's like, we're lucky. We're super lucky.
I know, it feels really unique, doesn't it?
So speaking of the industry, how have you seen things change over time? And then we'll get more specific.
Well, the big thing is around automation, and that you used to have to sit in front of a keyboard, kind of click through the prompts to install an operating system from some optical media. Like, you had to be physically there. And I've done this lots of times. And today, you just start an image pretty much all the time. And you call APIs when you need to accomplish something. So it's more and more programmatic, and that trend is only going to, you know, continue, I think. It's not going to go backward, that's for sure.
Yeah. I know, you know, a lot of people are, I mentioned this before, are worried about serverless and like how the stuff is changing and like the cloud and all this stuff. But I think you put it very succinctly earlier when you just said that, like, it used to be, yes, good sysadmins are good programmers also and automate everything. But I think that is becoming more and more inescapable now. I mean, you used to be able to survive as a guy that like knew printers and knew, you know, could reboot Apache and then just like played video games the rest of the time. Like, those days might be over now.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing.
It's the natural evolution of the industry, and you know, you got to learn and keep up with it. So I think the fact is, you've got to be a programmer. And if you don't know how to program now, you've got to start learning. If you decide you don't want to, you might have jobs in hospitals or government places, schools, police departments, places that have old infrastructure that kind of run old shops. But even that, one day, 10 years into the future, that's going to change. Maybe longer. I can't put a timeline on it. I don't know necessarily. But I do know all the interesting stuff today is happening in cloud, and cloud is programmatic, and it's not going to need system administrators in the traditional sense for much longer. So it's not to say that there's not room for operations, because there definitely is. Somebody has to keep things online, monitor things, keep things releasing in a steady cadence, keep things secure. But it's not the same job. And so it's kind of getting more and more refined. So a system administrator today needs to take what they read in the book and learn it, because it's foundational knowledge, and then think about how to practice that in their daily cloud programming duties. Like, what's behind the scenes, right? What's happening on the host? They may not control the host, but what's happening on the host? Like, those are important things to know.
Yeah, there's so much. That's one of the things. I mean, I like the operating system. I I'm interested in the operating system. And that's actually one of the things I'm happy about, is that knowing about the operating system is more important now than ever, because you often don't get to talk to the real operating system. So you have to know about operating systems so that you can go troubleshoot something where you can only see like vague symptoms that are sort of once removed from the actual problem, which makes that stuff even more important to know. So you can be like, this smells like a disk IO issue, or like some kind of weird network config issue where like something's getting fragmented that I don't want, or whatever.
And knowing what tools to turn to measure that
Yeah.
stuff and to plot it and to learn from it, like that's a skill that that you should acquire, I think, as an admin. It's kind of a core function, really.
Yeah. And just because it says serverless on the tin doesn't mean that you have an excuse not to actually understand how it works behind the scenes. I love that you're coming out so strongly in terms of being like, your primary focus after you just get comfortable on a Linux system should be programming. It's a really hard one to get through to people, because programming can seem like a really terrifying mountain to climb when you're staring at it from the bottom. But it's doable. It
It is
is.
doable. It's a big skill to learn. It's like it's learning a language. It really is. If you've never done it before, it can be intimidating, and it doesn't help matters that, at least in my view, a big portion of developers are kind of pretentious, right? They're like, if you're not writing the most idiomatic code, and if you don't have the most refined and performant function, you're embarrassed to release your code. I personally have felt that. But on the other hand, ultimately, you kind of just need to get the job done, and you can learn how to do it. So don't be intimidated to start programming just because you don't know how. It's like pretty critical, really, at this point. At this stage, you've got to be able to do it.
Yeah. And I think actually coming at programming from like a sysadmin kind of mindset, that like more hacker mindset, obviously it can be easy to go too far and be like, oh, quality is irrelevant, I'm just going to write spaghetti code all day and screw whoever comes after me. But as long as you don't go fully down that road, it's actually a great way to learn programming, because if anybody's got a gradual on-ramp, it's us. Like, you start with Linux and Unix commands. You put those in a file. Congratulations, that's a shell script. It's like, now the next step is functions and like basic abstraction. It's like, hey, you're programming. Now we need some control structures. And it's like, it's so gradual if you already understand, just because Unix and Linux is designed to be programmed. And it was designed that way before anybody else caught on, way before Windows caught on, way before the cloud existed. It's like that. If you use Linux and Unix, you will just begin to think that way. And learning to do the most important thing you'll learn to do, which is programming, has never been this easy. It's never.
Yeah. It's one of these few skills that you can acquire completely free, just from videos and like online tutorials. You can learn to become an expert programmer with no formal education. And that is, it's unprecedented, really, in a lot of ways in modern society. So that's kind of a fun thing to leverage, I guess.
When you are faced with like learning something new, approaching something you don't really understand, what is your kind of process for learning about it, deconstructing it, and actually gaining usable skills in that thing?
For me, and I think for a lot of people, it's about using and doing. Like, reading will get you part of the way, and usually I'll at least start, of course, by kind of reading basics. But as soon as I can, I like to dive in and start typing out whatever it is. If I need to learn Golang, which I did a couple of years ago, I just started writing some basic code in it. And like, I made the difficult choice to skip using Python, which I'm a lot more comfortable with, and like implement this new thing I needed in Go. And so that first time you do it, it's pretty hard and painful. And then I start to be familiar with the language and I know it. So doing for me is the big thing. On top of that, if you really want to dive deep, I like to turn to other people, because that's where you can learn kind of the expert level. So go to meetups on the topic, talk to experts that go to a conference about it, pick up a specialized book about it. Other people, though, and the communication is kind of the big thing to turn to after examples.
That's great. Yeah, that is. Those are exactly the two most powerful things I have found. To start doing it before you feel like you fully understand it, and to get involved with a community that's going to help get you unstuck for weird small things.
Yeah, don't go into production until you do understand it.
Do you know that the first Golang thing I ever really wrote is still in production?
Wow, impressive.
Totally. I mean, and it was a small thing, but I totally credit Go. It was like totally straightforward. Obviously, it was reviewed by somebody more experienced than me, but the thing, it's rock solid. Like, what more do you want as a sysadmin from a network facing service of some kind? It's like it's just beautiful.
Goes great for that reason.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now and where you're going next, and if you've got any projects that you think are cool that people should take a look at, plug them here. I will put them in the description box for people to come check out.
Cool. Well, so the book is for all of the authors kind of a side project, right? Something we work on in our spare time, which is first of all insane for a book of this thing. And second of all, it means that the book takes a really long time to produce because we're all doing it whenever we have moments and it's a big book. So this edition took 3 years, which in system administration land is forever. Everything changes. And so by the time you're done with the first chapter, 2.5 years go by, you got to like revisit it and rewrite a bunch of it. This was in fact the case with the containers chapter, which I made the unfortunate decision of like choosing that one first. And then I had to rewrite a lot of it.
Oh man, how Docker has changed just in the last year. It's like,
Yeah, keeping up with it's just impossible. So anyway, my point being, we all kind of have day jobs on top of that. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to mention the startup that I'm working at now, Kountable, where I'm the director of ops and security, is a fascinating company because it's got a real mission that is measurable and will change people's lives. It's about trade finance. It's not a particularly interesting topic probably for the viewership right now, but it's a startup that I'm pretty excited about working on. So that's like part of my life now. And the other part is around cloud and cloud evangelism and making sure that I'm educating people, because part of my job is to be an educator at this point. Like that's why I chose to write the book and do some Linux videos you may have seen in my background too. I've done some Linux tutorial videos, and I've done some classwork and stuff. I like to kind of evangelize open source and Linux. And so I've been working in the cloud area a lot. I work on AWS platform a lot. I'm about to open source a tool for the Amazon parameter store. So you can see that on Countable's GitHub soon. I'm pretty excited about that. It's nothing too exciting or groundbreaking, but it's going to be just another tool in the chest to make Amazon a little easier to use. And I'm doing a talk about that at reInvent in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks.
oh, I'm not going this year. I'm sorry to hear that. I would have loved to see you.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at now. And whether there's another book in the future, who knows? Can't commit either way on that one.
Sure. For the sake of sysadmindom, I hope there is. It would be hard to replace this one as just like the standard.
Yeah, I'd sure like to keep it alive. Every year that goes by, it's a question as to whether it makes sense to to continue to develop a dead tree edition of a book. Every year you're like, are people still buying books or not? I guess we'll know whether we're getting people buying it or not.
Is the publisher going to volunteer some copies for people? Is that a thing?
Yeah, we could
That
probably,
I should talk about that?
if you have an idea of how to raffle them or something.
I mean, it's a pretty lame idea. I was just going to basically say, you know, retweet the tweet that is announcing this video with your favorite tidbit, the thing that stuck out to you the most or was the most useful, and I will just randomly select however many copies we have from that list
Okay, nice.
of usernames. Is that a thing that you think will
Great.
work?
Let's go with like 5 copies. It's nice,
Cool.
nice whole number.
Yeah, that's perfect. So we've talked up the book quite a bit. For those of you who are watching this, we've decided on a little game, a little sharing game. You can get yourself a copy. Ben's going to be giving away 5 copies. And the way it's going to work is if you want to sort of enter your name, retweet the tweet that's attached to this video where I'm promoting it, and just leave a comment on which tidbit stood out for you the most, what you learned that was the most interesting, just like the one nugget that stands out the most for you. And from that list, we'll choose 5 people randomly. Maybe I'll live code the Python program I'll write for that. And yeah, you can get a copy.
That sounds good. Well, thanks so much for all the questions and for your promotion of the book and your interest in the book. We really appreciate
Yeah.
it. It's kind of, you're the kind of reader that really makes it worthwhile to do. Frankly, it's a pretty big project, and it's nice to know that people appreciate it.
Yeah, for every one of me, like there are thousands of me that do not have a YouTube channel to rave about it on. So cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on, for taking the time. Again, it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
All right.
Right
Have a good
on.
one.
You too. See you.
Bye bye.